If you wander through Krakow, Poland today, you'll encounter something truly bizarre. Right at the foot of Wawel Hill, there's a bronze statue that breathes real fire. It's not some kind of digital trick or a modern art installation. It's a physical sculpture that periodically breathes out flame, acting as a living reminder of a legend that has defined the city's identity for centuries. When visitors stand before this bronze beast, they aren't just looking at a piece of metal, they're feeling the heat of a terror that once gripped the city. Now let's look at the paradox. This isn't just a bedtime story for children. The legend of the Dragon of Wawel Hill, or the Smok Wawelski, is one of the oldest foundations of Polish mythology. Some of the earliest records of this tale date back to the 13th century, making it a cultural anchor for people of Polish descent. But here's the twist. The beast that terrorized Krakow was not defeated by a legendary king or a royal army. Instead, it was taken down by a humble shoemaker's apprentice. A needle, some thread, and a clever idea were more effective than any sword. I've spent a lot of time looking into this, and it's a fascinating contradiction. The most vulnerable person in the social hierarchy had the only weapon capable of defeating an apex predator. In this episode, we'll explore the legend of the Wawel Dragon and the clever cobbler Skuba. But we'll go further. I'm going to show you how this myth is actually grounded in a real prehistoric beast that once lived in Poland, and why the bones hanging in the cathedral are such a strange anomaly. Stay with me. Let's get our bearings on where this all happened. High above the city, King Krak lived in a grand castle built on Wawel Hill, a place that gave him a sweeping view of the surrounding area. It's a spot that would eventually house the kings of Poland, but long before the royalty, there was something else lurking beneath the rock. On the western slope of Wawel Hill, there is a cavern known as the Dragon's Den, or Smocha Jama as it's known locally. It's described as one of the great curiosities of the hill, and for good reason. This isn't just some shallow hole. The cave was formed nearly 12 million years ago through karst development in Jurassic limestone. When you look at the scale of it, it's actually massive. The Dragon's Den is 270 meters long in total, though if you visit today, you'll find that only 81 meters of the cavern are open to the public. I find the way people enter the space quite strange. Visitors enter the cave via a staircase in a brick tower that was formerly an Austrian well. With the whole visit beginning at the foot of the Thieves' Tower. It feels a bit like descending into a secret vault. In fact, until the 19th century, the lowest lying chamber of the cave was actually used to supply water to Wawel's buildings. It was a utility space, not a tourist attraction. There was a time when the cave was still open to the elements, too. Historian Ambrosi Grabowski entered the cave through the natural entrance in 1829, but that changed shortly after. A brick dome was constructed in 1830 to close the natural entrance of the cave, sealing it off from the world above. You can almost smell the damp limestone and old sulfur just thinking about it. It's the kind of claustrophobic prehistoric space where you could easily imagine something ancient and hungry waiting in the dark. Now let's look at the people living under the shadow of this beast. This story takes place over 1,000 years ago in present-day southwestern Poland. A king ruled from a castle on top of a hill, having built a great city by a river on fertile land. That man was King Krak, who founded the city of Krakow on the Vistula River. The city was named after its founder, though some records call him Krakus, Gracchus, or King Krakus. Everything was peaceful until a dragon settled in a cave at the castle, ending the peaceful life of the residents. This creature lived in a limestone cave under the hill, in a place unknown. We call it the Wawel Dragon, and it didn't just want a house, it wanted a constant supply of food. Here is where it gets really dark. The dragon demanded a weekly sacrifice of 1 cow and 3 sheep. Some accounts say his gluttony demanded every week as many head of cattle as there were days. If the residents were disobedient or refused to deliver the offering, the monster would punish them by taking as many human heads. I can't even wrap my head around the fear, but the dragon terrorized the land by snatching sheep from meadows and attacking carts on forest tracks. It left no merchant to come back. But there are even darker versions of the legend. In Marcin Bielski's version, the dragon enjoyed eating young maidens and forced the townsfolk to sacrifice a young woman once every month. According to this version, every girl in the city was eventually sacrificed, except for the king's daughter, Wanda. The pressure on the city was absolute. I can't even imagine the sheer terror of a monthly sacrifice of young virgins to a maiden-devouring monster. King Krak didn't just wait for the terror to end. He put a price on the beast's head. He promised eternal fame and wealth to anyone who could defeat the dragon. It was the kind of offer that makes a man forget his fear, the chance to be richly rewarded, to perhaps marry the princess, or even eventually become king himself. For a ruler like Krak, it was a desperate gamble to save his city. And the volunteers came. These were the best knights and warriors of the primitive Polish state, men who believed their steel was absolute. But here's the thing. They were fighting something that didn't play by human rules. We are just talking about a big lizard. This creature had already decimated other kingdoms before it ever found the caves of Wawel Hill. It was an apex predator on a global scale. I can only imagine the scene. These knights riding out in the dead of night, their armor gleaming under the moon, thinking they had the advantage. Then they saw it. The dragon had scales like armor, which made swords useless, and claws like knives that could shred through leather and mail in a single swipe. Its eyes were red as molten stone, glowing from the darkness of the cave. Most of these brave hearts failed before the fight even started. They fled upon seeing its fire or hearing its roar, a sound that probably vibrated in their very marrow. For those who didn't run, the result was the same. The dragon's breath would engulf them in flames, turning their own protective gear into ovens. Their colossal strength simply overwhelmed them. Steel, for all its prestige, was nothing more than a snack for a monster that burned hotter than any forge. That's where things get interesting. While the royal knights were still reeling from their failures, a humble shoemaker named Skuba appeared before King Krak to offer his help. Now, let's think about the visual contrast here. You have these heavily armored warriors, and then you have this young man, a cobbler's apprentice named Skuba. He wasn't a warrior. He was known in the area for sewing comfortable shoes for the residents. I have to wonder, what was going through the knights' heads? Because they laughed at Skuba. They didn't believe an inexperienced youth could succeed where the finest steel and the strongest arms had failed. It's a classic underdog story, isn't it? A simple lad, a shoemaker's apprentice, steps forward to face an apex predator. If we look at the historical records, the details vary slightly. Some sources, like those from the 16th century, specifically mention him as a shoemaker's apprentice. Joachim Bielski and Marcin Bielski, writing in 1597, describe him as a cobbler's apprentice named Skuba, or even Scuba, as the source spells it. Here's the thing. The royal knights saw only the lack of a sword, but Skuba probably saw something they didn't. He didn't have armor, and he didn't have a legendary blade. All he had was a needle, thread, and the ability to construct something from leather and stuffing. Remember that name, Skuba, because while the knights relied on brute force, this apprentice was about to use a bit of chemical warfare. And if you want to know about the strange bones hanging in the cathedral that claim to be proof of this beast, we'll get to that in a bit. Since the royal knights had failed, King Krak gave Skuba a chance and granted his request for a large sheepskin. Now, let's think about the plan. Skuba wasn't looking for a weapon. He didn't want a sword or steed to defeat the dragon. He decided to use his wits instead. I find it fascinating how the story shifts from the battlefield to a workshop. We're moving from the royal army's heavy armor to a needle and thread. Skuba worked with great skill and effort, meticulously sewing sulfur into the sheepskin to make it look like a real animal. He didn't just stop at the sulfur. Oh no, he used pitch and tar to seal the gaps, ensuring the decoy was airtight and the scent was masked. Using a needle and thread, he crafted a fake lamb, which King Krak had bought from a local farmer. It's a kind of chemical warfare, isn't it? He's essentially building a small internal combustion engine made of wool and sulfur. This is the detail that changed everything for me, the craftsmanship of the trap. He wasn't just stuffing a skin, he was creating a precise, realistic decoy that could fool an apex predator's senses. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this part, whether the sulfur was meant to smell like a beast or simply to be a hidden own-weight load. But the result was the weight and shape of a lamb hidden inside a woolly shell and placed right in the mouth of the beast. Under the cover of night, Skuba acted. He placed the fake sheep near the dragon's den, carefully positioning the lamb at the cave mouth to lure the beast. To make the trap more convincing, he lit a small fire nearby, adding to the sensory deception. It was a gamble, but the plan was set. When the dragon woke up the next morning, it was ravenous. Seeing the sheep, the dragon galloped down that fake sheep whole, mind you, without a single thought, simply convinced it was the real deal. But here's the catch. That's where the chemical reaction begins. Once inside, the sulfur and pitch caused a burning sensation in the dragon's stomach, making it feel as if a fire had been lit inside its belly. The dragon's throat and insides burn, and the dragon, panicking, run to the river. It didn't just drink a bit of water, it drank massive amounts of water from the Vistula River to quench the fire in its belly. The dragon drank and drank, and in fact, the Vistula shrank because it drank so much water. I've always found it's a terrifying way to go, but a satisfying end for a monster. The dragon continued to drink until its belly swelled up like a balloon. It just kept drinking from the Vistula River until a loud crack echoed across the valley. The dragon burst, the excessive amount of water consumption leading to the dragon's death by explosion. It just simply exploded. Wait, here is the part where the legends start to diverge. I've been digging into the different versions of this story, and some of them take a really strange turn. Usually we think of the dragon as this mindless, exploding, fire-breathing monster, but in one specific version, the dragon survives. He doesn't just survive the burst, but he actually apologizes to the villagers. It's a total shift in tone, from a horror story to a strange sort of peace treaty. And then there is Skuba. In the standard version, he's the hero who gets the princess and the riches. But in another account, Skuba declined the marriage offer. He didn't want the royal life. Instead, he chose to stay with the dragon as a guardian of the land. I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what to make of this. The idea of a cobbler's apprentice and a reformed monster acting as the city's protectors is a completely different vibe than the slay the beast narrative. It's almost like the story evolved to fit different moods. One where the dragon is a disaster to be erased, and another where the dragon is a lesson in redemption. It's just a detail that really sticks with me because it flips the entire ending on its head. Gold. That's usually how these stories end, right? But for Skuba, the reward was far more than just metal. King Krak rewarded Skuba with a mountain of gold and eternal fame, finally giving the apprentice a status that the royal knights, who had all failed to defeat the beast, could never achieve. It's a bit of an ironic twist, isn't it? The boy with the needle and thread had outplayed the men with swords. Now, the royal chroniclers recorded Skuba's name in the books of history and ensured that his victory over the dragon was not forgotten. But the real prize was waiting. You see, the king had vowed that anyone who could slay the creature would marry his daughter and become king. This wasn't just a mountain of gold, it was a total shift in social class. Skuba married the king's daughter, Princess Wanda, and inherited the land after the old king died. In some versions of the story, like those recorded by Vincent Cadlubec, the dragon appeared during the reign of a legendary King Krak, also known as Gracchus, and the victory of the hero became the foundation of the city's identity. And that is where we see the long-term legacy. The city was renamed in honor of Krak and continues to bear his name today as Krakow. In other tellings, the city is named in honor of his dead brother, Krak II, but the same core truth remains. The shoemaker's apprentice became a royal crown, and a terrifying nightmare became a city's most famous legend. It's a strange jump from a sulfur-stuffed sheep to a royal marriage, but that's how history and myth blend together. Wait, the version of the story we've been following, the one with the clever cobbler, is actually just one way of telling it. If you dig into the actual records, the narrative shifts. The oldest written telling of the story comes from an early 13th century bishop of Krakow, Vincent Cadlubec. He was a historian of Poland and wrote the Chronicle of Master Vincent called Cadlubec. In his account, the hero isn't a shoe apprentice, but King Krak's sons, Lech and Krak the Younger.
Here's the thing. They were unable to defeat the creature by hand, so they used the same sulfur trick to kill the dragon. They stuffed a calfskin with smoldering sulfur, which caused the dragon's fiery death. But then, the story takes a dark turn. An argument broke out over who deserved the honor of slaying the beast, and the older brother, Lech, killed his younger brother, Krak the Younger.
I'm not entirely sure why the story changed so much over time, but in Cadlubic's version, Lech lied and claimed his brother was killed in the battle and that the dragon was responsible for the dragon's death. It gets even more twisted. After the father died, Lech became king, but his secret was revealed. And he was revealed and he was dethroned. He was banished and exiled for his treachery. Because of this, the city was renamed Krakow in recognition of the brave and innocent Krakus, the younger brother. Later, a 15th century historian named Jan Dlugosz presents a similar tale, but with a twist. The younger brother, Krak Jr., killed the older brother, Lech. Dlugosz notes that the killing of the brothers occurred after their father, the old king, had died. And then we have a 16th century poet named Marcin Bielski, who presents a version where the old king was named Krak. It's a strange evolution of the story, isn't it? We go from a family tragedy of fratricide and stolen honor to a simpler, more inspiring story about a humble cobbler. It makes you wonder if the legend was used to refine a royal lineage or simply to make the same victory over the monster the more palatable. Look, if you actually visit the Wawel Cathedral in Krakow, Poland, you'll see something truly strange. Hanging right above the doorway of the local castle's cathedral are what people call the dragon bones. For centuries, the legend says these were the dragon's bones. But when you look at them, you realize they aren't from any fire-breathing monster. Science tells us they are actually remains of prehistoric creatures, likely a whale or a mammoth. Specifically, the bones include a whale jaw and a woolly rhinoceros skull. I'm not entirely sure why people were so desperate to keep the belief alive, but it's the kind of detail that changes everything for me. It makes me wonder if the dragon wasn't a monster at all, but a symbol or metaphor for evil as a whole. Or maybe it's more grounded in a real physical threat. Some believe the dragon is a symbol of an enemy tribe of Avars, taking the local population as tribute. That feels a lot more plausible than a giant lizard, doesn't it? And then there's the darker side of the story. Sometimes the story is interpreted as a reminder of human sacrifices from an older, unknown myth. This is the story of Daniel and the Babylonian dragon might have influenced the tale. The beast is just a mask for the something older and more human. So we're left with these giant bones of a whale or mammoth hanging above the door, and the same question. Was the dragon a real beast, or just a story we tell to explain the terror of an enemy tribe, or ancient rituals? It really comes down to this. The victory didn't belong to the sword, but to the needle and thread. When we look back at the reign of King Krak, we see a pattern. The knights had the armor, but the shoemaker had the plan. It reminds me that Krak was not a warrior, but he was quite clever, and that's the only reason the people survived. If you travel to Poland's oldest capital, Krakow, you can still trace the path of this story. You can walk the length of that 270-meter cave and then step outside to see the metal and fire-breathing sculpture located right at the entrance to the Dragon's Den. It's a wild piece of art, but the site itself is a preserved piece of history. In fact, it was Prof. Adolf Shishko Bohush who prepared the Dragon's Den for the visitors after 1918, turned a prehistoric void into a place where we can still imagine a sulfur-stuffed lamb causing a monster to explode. We're left with this image of a humble apprentice outsmarting an apex predator. It's a concrete reminder that the smallest person in the room, the one everyone laughs at, is often the only one capable of seeing the solution that the brute force simply cannot find.